contacts that have to do with this particular customer you have selected. It might be that this is the person in the office that you speak with. It might be one of the owners. All you have to do to add a contact is come to the very bottom. You'll see Manage Contacts. Here you can choose Add New, Edit Selected, or Delete. If I click Add New, you'll notice that you can go in and put in the person's title, their first and last name, and then if you want to put in their work phone, fax, mobile, any of these fields, you'll be able to do that. You can also specify if this is an additional contact, a primary contact, or a secondary contact. And I'm going to cancel this, but you see that you can have a lot of different contacts here related to this particular customer if that's what you need to do. The next tab over are your to-dos. To-dos are things that you have to take care of related to this particular customer and or job. You can see here that a to-do can be a phone call, a fax, an email, a meeting, an appointment, or a task. The way you create a new to-do is you come to the bottom where it says Manage To-Dos and you create a new one. I'm going to go ahead and add one here so you can see what happens when you create a to-do. Here's where you choose what type of to-do this is, and let's say you have to set a meeting. You can choose the priority, is it high, low, or medium? It's going to assume it's with this customer and job, but you could change that if you need to. And there's also a due date that you can set here. If you have a particular time that day, you can also set that here as well. Now all you're going to do at the bottom is type in the details. Set up meeting with Christy about new job. Down here it says the status is active. You'll see if it's already been completed, you can change the status to done or you can make it inactive. But I'm going to leave it on active and click OK. And now you're going to see that that to-do shows up in this list. What's going to happen is once this to-do has been completed, I can double click where it says done, which will bring the edit to-do window up, and I can change this status to say done and then click OK. And now you'll see there's a check mark there indicating that to-do has been done. These to-dos will also show up on the calendar function that we'll talk about in a later module. Notice there's also reports down here. There were for each of these tabs if you want to run some reports on to-dos in this case. The next tab over says Notes. This is where you can keep notes on different conversations you might have with your customer. Maybe you actually do something you want to track a note for, you can do that. And you can go to the Manage Notes at the bottom to add a new note. When you add a note, it's going to be the next one in the list. If there's a particular one you'd like to pin, that means you want to keep it right here so that you can see it every time you click on that customer. You can actually do that by making sure you have the little pin right here. The last tab are your sent emails. It used to be that if you wanted to send emails to this customer, it didn't track those emails. You could send things through QuickBooks, like an invoice, you could email it over, for example, but you had no way to track your sent email, and now you do. You can also go to the bottom and manage your emails here. You can see that if you had some, you could remove different ones if you wanted to, but they will automatically show up there once you actually email those particular transactions. I want to go ahead and stop the video right here. There is a part 2 to this. We've got a few more things we want to look at. I'm going to have you go ahead and go over to the second part, Working with Customers and Jobs, Part 2. We've got a lot more to talk about when it comes to working with customers and jobs. This is Part 2. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks, and we're going to go ahead and add a new customer. The way we're going to add a new customer is we're going to the very top left where it says New Customer and Job. If we click the drop down, we can add a new customer. The first thing I'd ask you is to put in the customer's name. Remember, we're going to stay consistent with how the list is set up, so I'm going to do last name, comma, first name, and this will be Tom Allen. There is a place to put in the opening balance. The way this field is designed is, as of the start date of your company file, how much money did this customer owe you? You could put in that total here and then put in that date. I personally don't like to do that because even though my accounting would be correct, I don't have a way of going back and seeing that that was actually 3 different invoices that I had invoiced my customer for that was for a total of $1,000. I personally like to go back and put each invoice he still owed me for in, and that way I can see everything going on when I look at a report. The next thing is the address info. You're going to be able to put in the company name. If Tom Allen had a company, you could plug that in here. You could also go ahead and put his full name back in these fields here. Now, a very common question is, if I've got his name up here, why do I need to put it back here? One of the things we'll talk about towards the end of all these videos is the fact that you can do mail merges with Microsoft Word. It will actually pull from these fields here, not from here. This is just for this list. So that means you'll want to go ahead and make sure that you have all of the fields filled in with the information you might need if you're ever going to be pulling some of this information. You can see you can put in his job title, phone, fax, email, website, and any of these fields you see here can represent any of these. So you just change it to the one you want it to represent. You'll notice that as you start typing his company name, that it pulls that down here. So you're going to want to go in and edit this information. This is the actual billing information that will pull onto any correspondence you send out. Make sure this information is the way you want it. You can always come back in here and edit this if you need to. If you actually have an instance where you might have a customer say, I want you to send the invoice to one place, but send the physical items to another address over here, you can actually change all of this, but typically you just want this part here. The next tab on the left are your payment settings. A lot of these fields are just informational for you. For example, if you give your customers account numbers, you have a place to plug that in here. You might want to give different customers different repayment terms. You'll see there's net 30 on the list, net 60, net 15, there's due upon receipt. There's also 1 and 2% to net 30. Just to tell you what these mean, let's just use 2% to net 30. This means the customer's invoice will be due in 30 days, but if he pays you in 10 days, he can take 2% off of the total of the invoice. It's a way of getting your customers to pay you a little bit early. Does this customer have a preferred delivery method? Do they like things emailed or mailed to them? Is there a preferred payment method as well? Do they typically pay you with MasterCard or cash? And this doesn't mean that every time they pay you this way. It just means that they usually pay you this way. There is a place to put in your customer's credit card information if they buy from you on a regular basis. That way you don't have to keep asking for that information. I personally would never in a million years put any of this in here. It's just safe for you to save this somewhere else if you need to keep it. A lot of companies still don't keep this information anywhere. They just ask for it again every time the customer makes a purchase. On the right, you can set a credit limit. What would happen is if you tried to invoice your customer for more than they owed and it exceeded the credit limit, it would pop up and just say to you, this customer has exceeded the credit limit. Would you still like to sell them something? And you can also set a price level. A lot of times what happens is if this is a commercial customer, you give them a different price than maybe a residential customer. You can also set up the online payments, and I mentioned this when we were going through the preferences. If you've already set it up with Intuit, then you can actually email this invoice over to the customer, and then when they get it, they can just click a button and pay you with a credit card or bank transfer right from there. Back to the left, the next tab over says Sales Tax Settings. When we talk about sales tax, there's a couple things that come into play, and one of them is when you're actually charging tax, do you charge it to this customer, yes or no? You might have a customer who's a nonprofit organization where they are tax exempt, whereas another customer might have to pay sales tax. If they do pay sales tax, which sales tax item or group do you charge them? And then if they have a resale number, you can plug that in. Basically what that means is, let's say that I sell chairs in my store and my customer comes to me and buys chairs to put in his store to sell. He could have applied to the state for a resale exemption for sales tax, and if he has that resale number, I can plug it in here just in case I ever need it for some reason. The next tab on the left is additional info. You can track things like the customer type. Notice they're tracking commercial and residential customers. This would be whatever list you wanted to create. You can see you can add new. If you have sales reps in your organization, you can add those. That way you can track which rep works with which customers. And on the right, you'll see a couple of fields that say contract number, birthday, and spouse's name. Now these fields are not here automatically. You add those. What you do is you go down to Define Fields. You type in the name of the field that you want to create and check off if you want to see that field for customers, vendors, and/or employees so that you don't have to set it up 3 different times. Then you can actually add information into those fields. The last tab on the left is Job Info. Now, in this case, we're just setting up a customer, but if we were setting up a job, we could put in information like the description of the job, the type of job, maybe the status of the job, a start date, projected end date, and an actual end date. That's the information you need to set up when you're setting up a customer. I'm going to click OK, and you'll now see your customer in the list. Now you'll notice that it put Tom Allen at the very top of the list, not alphabetical. All I have to do is click the word name at the top of the column there, and that will resort the list. Now let me show you real quick how to add a job for Tom Allen. As long as I'm clicked on Tom Allen, I can go back up here where it says New Customer and Job and add a job. I'm going to call this job Kitchen Remodel. You'll notice that it pulled in all of the information from my customer. Unless I need to change any of that, all I have to do is click OK. And now you'll see there's a job for Tom Allen. I wanted to also mention when you go back to the New Customer and Job option here, you can add multiple customers and jobs. If you actually have some of this information already in Excel and you've got it set up with the same columns that you see here, you can actually copy and paste this information. If you want to set up a new customer and job in here, you can go down to the very bottom, type on the last line, and then it will update this for you. And this is just a little time-saving tip that it's giving you, but that's another thing you can do if you want to add a lot of customers and jobs at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And that's a quick way to work with your customers and your jobs. I want to go ahead now and start talking a little bit about working with estimates. We're going to head over to section 2 and we'll be talking about setting up estimates and using these customers and jobs that we just created. We're working in Module 4 where we're talking about customers and jobs. We've already looked at Section 1 where I showed you how to set up customers and jobs. Now we're going to start using some of that information, and we're going to start using them by creating estimates. A prime example of an estimate is in a construction company. They will give you a quote or an estimate on what a job is potentially going to cost. And this is a great feature because you can actually take those estimates and turn them into invoices and get paid and then put the money in the bank further down the line. Not all companies use the estimate feature. If you don't use this feature, then you can skip this and go straight to invoicing. But this is the first part of creating estimates. There is a part 2 to this. Make sure you watch both parts so that you get a full view of how estimates work. Let's flip over to QuickBooks and we'll create our first estimate. You'll notice here that we are still in our Customer Center and I want to leave it open. I'm just going to use the Open Windows list here and click back on Home. We're getting ready now to talk about the entire Accounts Receivable section, which is all of this right here in the middle of your home screen. And if you notice, the first one here says Estimates. Before I click on that, I want to point out one quick thing. You'll notice that purchase orders and estimates are in the same line. And the reason for that is because these are both considered non-posting. You can actually create an estimate all day long, but if a customer never asks you to do the work and you never do anything with the estimate, it just sits there and it doesn't affect your books really in any way. You would have to run specific estimate reports to see what's going on with those estimates. Like I mentioned also, if your company doesn't use the estimate feature, then you would just start with the invoice feature right here. I'm going to go ahead and click on estimates so that we can start creating our first estimate. I'm going to go ahead and maximize the screen here, and the first thing I want to mention is you have this area on the right, and you'll see this with invoices as well. If you pull in a particular customer from here, which we're going to do in a second, you will see some information about that customer and job here. You'll see a summary, some recent transactions, some notes. If you don't want to see this, just use this arrow to hide the history, and if you want to show it again for any reason, you can pull it back up, but that will give you more room to work on your screen. The first thing it asks you at the top is who is your customer and your job. From the drop-down list, I can pick my customer and my job, and one thing to remember is if you use the job feature, always click on the job and not the customer. If you click on the customer, what will happen is later when you start running reports, you will see other and you won't know what this is. Always click the job. Notice if I click kitchen remodel, now it says my customer and job is Tom Allen's kitchen remodel. Now something really cool that you can do in QuickBooks is I would like to add a second job to Tom Allen. So instead of a kitchen remodel, I've decided to do an estimate for a sunroom. Now I don't have to go back to the customer center and set all this up. I can do it right from here. What I'm going to do is go ahead and just remove kitchen remodel, and I have to have the colon at the end of Tom Allen. I'm going to go ahead and put in sunroom, and now I've got Allen, Tom, colon, sunroom, and if you forget that, it shows you right here, customer, colon, job. Now once I leave the field by hitting the tab or the enter key, it's going to tell me sunroom is not in the list and ask me if I would like to add it. I can do a quick add, which just puts it in this list, or I can go and do a full setup where I put in all that information about the customer address and all that stuff we went through earlier. Typically with a job, just quick add it. Now if I look on my list, I've got 2 jobs for Tom Allen. The next thing I'm going to see is the class list. Remember I told you that classes allow you to break up your company into smaller sections for reporting purposes. You don't have to use this feature, but if you do, you want to use it consistently so that your reports are accurate. Let's say in this case that it's going to be a remodel. And then notice over here is the template that's being used currently for the estimate. Now I can change the templates for each individual estimate if I want to. I'm going to leave it right now on the one that's there. We will talk about templates in a later module, and I'll show you how to create new ones or to edit some existing ones. The next thing you see is the date of the transaction. You can put any date you want here. It does not have to be the date that pulls in. Remember, it's going to pull the current date automatically if you've changed an option in the preferences that we talked about. The next thing is the estimate number. It's numbering it sequentially. All items in QuickBooks that are numbered start with the number 1. Checks, for example, invoices, in this case estimates. It will number the next one sequentially unless you happen to change it. You can make this number anything you want. You can even use the letters in the alphabet if you'd like, and it will number the next one sequentially. This is the name and address that we had typed in for our customer. If you happen to be here and you say, you know, he's really at P.O. Box 125, you can change it here, and what will happen is when you're totally finished and you save this, it will go ahead and pop up and ask you if you'd like to save it permanently in their record. The next thing I want to point out down here is where it says item. You have to actually click there to see this drop-down menu. Now we're going to talk about items in a later module because items are things that you actually sell your customer, or sometimes you buy items, but these are the line items that would actually go on this estimate. When you're looking at this list, sometimes items can be services you provide. If I scroll down the list, sometimes they can be actual inventory parts, They can be what we call non-inventory. They can be assets. You can kind of see the list here. We'll go through later when we talk about items and really look at this, but right now let's just pick a couple of them from the list. I'm going to pick framing, and you'll notice that it brought in the description, framing labor. I can type over this all day long if I wanted to, and this will also word wrap if I have a lot to say. I'm going to put in the quantity. We're going to say there's 10 of these, and the cost it brought in is $55 because that was set up in the actual item. Now let's say for whatever reason I'm going to sell these to him for $50. Maybe it's a new customer and I'm trying to get his business. And I wanted to just mention the unit of measurement that it skipped over. You'll notice it's not available right now. When you set up an item, if you set up the unit of measurement, that means that you can say, this is something I sell by the foot, the yard, the case, and this would be a drop-down list where you could pick that from the list. Now, we're over in the markup column, and I just wanted to show you that you can mark an item up a dollar amount or a percentage. I'm going to go ahead and say 30% of this one. Notice I typed the percent sign in. And if I tab through it, it will do the calculation for me automatically. The last column here where it says non, that means that this customer charges sales tax. That means that I charge sales tax, but this particular item is not subject to sales tax. Typically, if it's a service you provide, it's not, but a physical item, it is. I want to put one more item in here that is a physical part because I want to show you how to mark something up a dollar amount as well. I'm going to go ahead, and there are some wooden doors in here, and I'll go ahead and pick the exterior wooden door. And I'm going to say a quantity of 2 of these, and I'll just leave the price it pulled in. Now if you notice this time, the markup is a negative number and it's a percentage automatically. I'm going to type over that, but the reason it pulled that is because when the item was set up, they put in the setup that typically they have a particular price they buy it for and a particular price they sell it for, and that way it figured out the markup. But I'm just going to mark it up $1,000. Notice I'm not putting the percent sign this time, just the 1,000, and it will calculate for me. I can put in as many line items as I like. This is not the bottom of it. It will keep going on forever. That's a quick way to go ahead and set up a basic estimate. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that you see at the top here. And in order to do that, I'd like to stop the video here and go ahead and go into the estimates part 2 to finish this up. I'll see you shortly. Welcome back. We're in Module 4, working with customers and jobs. We've been talking about estimates, and I want to go ahead and continue where we left off. This is actually part 2 of working with estimates. Let's go ahead and flip to QuickBooks, and we'll keep going. Now that you know how to enter your line items in your estimate, let's talk about the options at the top of the screen. You'll notice there are several different tabs, and we'll start with the main tab. The first option that you're going to see here has to do with finding estimates. You're going to find that everything in QuickBooks is in date order. Let's say you were looking for a particular estimate and you couldn't find it. You could use your arrows that take you left or right to look for the next or previous estimate. If you can't find it that way, use this Find option right here, which lets you put in some criteria so you can search a little bit easier. If you knew the customer and job, you could plug that in. If maybe you had a particular date range, you knew you created it, you might look that way. You could look for estimate number or amount. This is only going to look for estimates. It's not going to look in all of QuickBooks for a date range or an amount of money. It's just for estimates. I'll go ahead and cancel that one. The next option is to create a new estimate, which would actually save the one you're on as well. And if you look at the very bottom right hand side of your screen, you'll notice there's an option that says Save in New. That's the exact same option. The next one over is an option where you can save your work. If this is taking you a while and you just want to make sure you don't lose it, you can hit the save option. But I want to show you that you can also save this as a PDF. Maybe you need to send it to someone and you need it in that PDF format. You can do that. The next one says delete. This is how you would delete this entire transaction. You can also create a copy. What if your customer asked you to create 2 estimates and maybe one had a little something that was different? Instead of redoing the whole thing, just make a copy and then make those few changes. The next one is the option to memorize this. We're going to be talking about this in a later module, but basically what it allows you to do is memorize this so that you can pull it up again at any time. You can also mark a transaction as inactive. Basically what that does is QuickBooks is going to keep a record of all of your estimates, but if you don't want this one to show up in reports and things like that, you can mark it as inactive, and then when you're ready you can activate it again. Moving over to the right, the next one is print. This is where you would go to print this estimate or to preview this, and I want to show you what it's going to look like if you preview it. Right now it's very plain. You would want to come in and customize this if you're going to send a lot of estimates out. Notice I can click to zoom in a little bit, but you'll see that it has your company name and address. It has the name of the customer and their address. You're going to see it says estimate. It's got some information on the right, the name of the project or the job. And then you'll see a description, quantity, unit of measurement, cost, and total. The first thing I want to point out is it does not show the name of the item, which is typically the first column. That's because your customer is going to see the description of the item, but you can name your items anything you want. That's more for internal use. Notice also they don't see the markup, so that column is hidden as well. At the bottom they see subtotal, sales tax, and total, and of course you can customize this to look any way you like. I'm going to go ahead and hit close at the top, and that'll take me back to my estimate. You can also, under print, save this as a PDF again, and you can also do a mail merge with Microsoft Word where you can actually create an envelope. If I click on that and make sure I have the correct envelope size chosen and then click OK, it's going to do that mail merge. You have to have Microsoft Word in your computer in order to be able to do this. You'll see it popped up Word down here at the bottom. I can click on it and actually pull up the envelope options, and then if I don't need to change those, I hit cancel and there's my envelope right there that I can print. I'm going to go ahead and say no right now because I don't actually want to print that. The next thing you can do is you can actually email this estimate to your customer. You can see right here you can email the estimate or the batch, and I want to tell you what the batch is. Right here is a checkbox that says email later. If I set up several different estimates for this customer and I check each one of these, then when I'm ready I can email the batch over and it will email all the ones that have email later checked. I can also attach a file. If I want to attach a file, all I have to do is hit attach file, and you've seen that option before where you can go through and choose a file on your computer, or if you wanted to pull one over that's in Outlook, any way you'd like to attach, you can. You can also create an invoice straight from here. Now chances are you're not going to be on this screen when you're ready to do that, but you can if you want to. And let me just mention the Start project. Intuit sells a product called MavenLink, which is more like a project management type software. They do give you a free 30-day free trial, so if you want to try it, you could click here and it would walk you through setting it up. It is not free, like I said, you do have to purchase it after that 30 days. Let's go over to the next tab, which says Formatting. We're going to be talking about these templates I mentioned earlier right here in a later module, but this is where you would go to actually work with those templates if you want to customize them. Here's your spell check. You also can insert a line, delete a line, or copy a line. Whichever line you're clicked on is the one you insert a line above it. You can delete or copy. And this has more to do with customizing your template. The tab that says Send/Ship, this is where you can do some of the mail merge options with Microsoft Word. And then you have some reports that are related specifically to estimates here. You can run a quick report, you can do a transaction history, estimate by job, estimate versus actual, or an item price list. And that's going to give you most of your options there. Most of the time you'll stay under the main tab. A couple of other things I want to mention. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you can actually see the subtotal, there's the markup, if there was any sales tax, and then the total at the very bottom. Over on the left, you can also add a customer message. You may say something like, please sign and date this proposal. You might say something like, thank you for your business. There's different options there. And also a little place for a memo that the customer will not see, that is just for you to see, and then also the customer tax code. And that's pretty much what you're going to see on an estimate. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save and Close at the bottom here. And because I changed Tom Allen's P.O. box earlier, it's asking me would I like to change this permanently in his record. I'll just say yes, and now that has changed. That's how you're going to go through and actually set up estimates for customers and jobs. Once you've created the estimates, you're going to sit back, and when the customer says do the work, you'll want to go through and create an invoice. And that's where we're going to start with the next video. I'm going to have you go ahead and go over to Section 3, Invoicing from Estimates, and we'll look at how all this invoicing works. Now that you've actually got your estimate set up in QuickBooks, if the customer calls and says, go ahead and start the work, you're going to want to get paid for some of the work you've done, and you're going to be able to create invoices directly from those estimates that you've already created. I want to show you how to go ahead and create an invoice directly from estimates. There are two parts to this video, so make sure you watch both parts so that you understand the full concept of how this works. Once you're ready to create that invoice, go ahead and follow the flowchart and click on Create Invoices. You'll notice that the invoice screen looks almost identical to the estimate screen with a few exceptions. The first thing I'm going to do is come over to the right and go ahead and hide the history so that I have more room to work on. And then I'm going to pull in my customer and my job. Remember, this is the sunroom that we're working on for Tom Allen. Now this window here is going to appear, and this is the available estimates window. What it's doing is listing all of the estimates for Tom Allen sunroom that we've not invoiced everything from. Even if there's a penny left, it's going to show up on this list. I'm going to choose the one I'd like to pull in and click OK. Now the next thing it's going to ask me is, do you want to pull in an invoice for the entire estimate, 100% of it? Maybe you want to create an invoice for a percentage of the entire estimate, or you can pull in selected items or different percentages. Let me just show you the bottom one, and then I'm going to go back and make it 30%. I'll just choose the bottom one and click OK. These are the items that are on the estimate, and you have the ability to say, I want to pull in 2 of these and 1 of these. Or you might pull in a certain percentage of each one. There's just all kinds of ways you can pull in whatever it is you want to pull from that estimate onto this invoice. I'm going to cancel that though. And just to show you this, because it still has Tom Allen sunroom here and I canceled, I need to go to the bottom and hit clear. Then I can pull it in again. I'm going to choose Tom Allen sunroom, choose the estimate I'd like to pull from, and then I'm going to pick the middle one and just put in 30. Now it knows 30%. You can type it or not here. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to click OK. And now you'll see it's pulled in 30% of my estimate. When you look over at the quantity, you'll see it pulled 3 of the framing and it pulled 0.6 of the wood door. If you wanted to add something to this, maybe a shipping charge or a delivery charge, let's see if they have one in the list that we can use. If I go down the list and look at this, I believe that they do have one close to the bottom here, and they actually have a delivery charge. And I want to charge them just $25. I'll just say quantity of 1, and the rate is $25. You can add as many line items as you want to this. This does not affect the estimate in any way. Now, a couple things I just want you to notice. First of all, a lot of this you'll be very familiar with from working with the estimates. We talked a little bit about the main tab, how you have a find feature here. If I'm looking for a particular invoice and I can't find it, I can use the arrows to search next or previous, and I can also use the find feature to go through and put in some criteria that I might know in order to help me find that particular invoice. New is the same thing as Save and New down here at the bottom. I've also got my Save option where I can save this as a PDF if I want, or just save this so that I don't lose my work. I can delete this invoice, create a copy. I can also memorize it. We also talked a little bit about mark as pending. Remember that if I want to keep this invoice in here, but maybe I'm not quite ready for it to show up in my reports for whatever reason, I can mark it as pending and come back later and then take that option off. I can print this. Let me go ahead and show you a preview of what this is going to look like. And you can see right now that it's very basic. You can see that I have my company name and address. I've got the word invoice at the top. There's a place for the bill to and the ship to. Obviously, if we're not shipping anything, we can go take this out. We'll talk about customizing this in a later module. And then you can see it has all the information at the bottom, the sales tax, if there were any payments already made, and a balance due at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I can also choose to print this later or email this later. We talked earlier about email later means that if you have several different ones you've created, you can send them all as a batch. Well, you can do the same thing with printing. If you actually create several invoices and you want to print them all at the same time, you can choose the print later option right up here. You can attach a file to this. Maybe you have something from your vendor that you want to attach. You'd be able to do that. And I want to talk real quick about add time/cost and what this means. If you have any expenses that you had incurred related to this particular customer and you want to at some point pull those all in and invoice the customer, you can do that. Now, we don't have any in here currently, but let me just pull up this screen so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to be able to keep track of any time I incurred, any expenses, any mileage, or any items. If I wanted to pull in anything that was under any of these tabs, I just check it off and click OK, and it will actually pull it into this window. And that way, I don't have to write this in my little book and remember it and come type it in. It's a real big pain to do that. So this is a great little feature if you have expenses that you need to turn around and invoice your customer for to get reimbursed. You can also apply any credits. If you'd already created a credit memo towards this invoice, this is a place where you can go to apply those credits. And let me just mention the progress. We don't really have too much of a progress to look at it right now, but if we had actually already invoiced several of these from that estimate, if we had actually received a payment, maybe made a deposit, then we can actually kind of track that. You could receive payment right from here. Chances are at this point, though, you don't have a payment. And even if you do, you might not be on this screen when you're ready to actually receive payment, so you can do that from the home screen as well. You can also create a batch. If there are multiple customers that are going to all chip in and pay this one invoice, then you can actually choose the Create a Batch option, and it will send an invoice to multiple customers, and then they can each pay their part. You can also create a refund or a credit at this point for this particular invoice. Let's go up and look at some of the options under the Formatting tab. One of the things we're able to do is we're able to come over to the templates that you see right here, and we're able to customize these or create a new one. And this is where we would go to work on some of those options. Here's your spell check. Here's where you can insert a line, delete a line, or copy a line, and then here's some more of the customize options for your template. Now, under the send/ship, there's a couple of new things here. If you have to ship physical items to your customer or to a job site or somewhere, then that means that you're going to have to go and schedule a pickup with FedEx, UPS, or the United States Postal Service. Typically, you would get out of QuickBooks and go to the internet and pull up your account with any of these, but you don't have to do that. You can do it right from here. Notice I can go ahead and schedule my FedEx pickup. I can go ahead for the UPS and schedule the UPS pickup, or for the Postal Service as well. It's going to basically take you to the FedEx website. You sign in, and then you'll be able to take care of all of these options. That's a pretty cool feature you can do from within QuickBooks. We do have some more mail merge options right over here. And then the last one, these are some reports that have to do with this particular invoice. You'll notice there's a quick report you can run. You can look at a transaction history or a journal. The transaction history is actually going to list all the transactions, so you can see any payments have been made towards this. You can see if it's linked to anything. And then when you look at the transaction journal here, it's going to show basically the same information, just in a timeline fashion. You can view any open invoices, look at your sales by customer detail, and also average days to pay summary. That's going to give you a quick overview of how the invoicing works right here. What I want to do is go ahead and stop the video here. We're going to go to part 2, and we're going to continue pulling everything off of that estimate into some invoicing, and then we can look at some reports having to do with that a little bit later. We just created an invoice from our estimate, and what we need to do now is go ahead and finish invoicing everything from that estimate, and then look at a couple of reports that have to do with invoicing. Let's go ahead and flip back over to QuickBooks, and we'll continue talking about invoicing from estimates. This is part 2. Now that we've completed the first invoice, let's go ahead and hit Save and New at the bottom. And I want to go ahead and invoice the customer for the remaining amounts that were left on the estimate. The process would be that the customer has okayed the job, everything's good, we've completed it. Let's go ahead and pull in Tom Allen Sunroom again. It's going to pull up the available estimates. We're going to choose the estimate that we're going to pull from. We're going to click OK. And this time you'll notice in the progress invoice window that the first one's a little bit different. Notice it says create an invoice for the remaining amounts of the estimate. We could also invoice for another 30% if we wanted to, or selected items. We're going to go ahead and invoice for the remaining amounts and click OK. You'll notice now it brought in everything that was left on that estimate that we had not yet pulled into an invoice. I'm going to go ahead and add a delivery charge to this as well. We're going to say that it's a quantity of 1 at $25. And that's all I want to add to that particular invoice. You're familiar with everything up here, so I'm not going to go through all that again. I'm just going to hit Save and Close at the bottom, and now we have invoiced everything. If we happen to create another invoice and pull in the same customer and job, it will not pull up that available estimate window again because there's nothing left to pull in. This window happened to be underneath, so this is our customer center, and I wanted to show you that if you're clicked on your customer, and in this case we're on the sunroom, here's the estimate we created, and there are both invoices we created. If I wanted to open any of these up, I could just double click on them and go right to that particular transaction. There are a couple of reports that I want you to be familiar with that have to do with customers. If you go to the menu and click on Reports, we're going to be looking at all these different reports in a later module, but right now I want you to look at the Customers and Receivables category, and then in there we're going to pull up the Open Invoices. Open means these have not yet been paid. This is the report you would want to pull on Fridays when you're looking to make some collection calls. When you're looking down this list, a couple things. Here's Tom Allen Sunroom. You'll see the 2 invoices that we just created. But a couple things just to be aware of when you're looking at the Open Invoice report. Let's say that you see something like an invoice for $100 and then below it it said payment of $100 and the balance is 0. That would actually be wrong, or I should say it shouldn't show up on this report. That just means that there is some payment that's not attached to that invoice. If they were, then they wouldn't show up on this report. You also might see just a payment by itself occasionally. That could be legitimate. Maybe a customer paid you ahead of time, but just make sure that there shouldn't be an invoice in there to attach that payment to. There's one other report I want you to look at. When I go back to reports, back to customers and receivables, there is a customer balance detail report. And this is the one that shows the customer's entire history. Here is our Tom Allen sunroom again, but I want you to look at Christy Abercrombie. She has 3 different jobs, and notice they're separated, but they show up under her name. You can see there's a couple of invoices, a payment, down here there's a check, there's a credit memo. So that's the entire history of the customer. Now let's go ahead and go back to home for a moment. And now we've completed the estimates and we've created 2 invoices, and now we're going to sit back and wait to get paid. And that's the fun part when we start getting money coming in the door. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and wrap up this particular video on invoicing from estimates. This was part 2. We need to go ahead now and talk about invoicing customers for products and services, and then we'll talk about receiving payments from customers. We are all the way down now in Module 4 to Section 4, where I'm going to talk to you briefly about invoicing customers for products and services. This is really very similar to what we just went through, except we won't be pulling any information from an estimate. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and create a real quick invoice to show you how this works. If I want to just create an invoice and not pull from an estimate, I'm just going to start with Create Invoices right here, and I'm going to pull in a customer and a job. I'm going to go ahead and pull in Tom's sunroom again, and let's just say this is something that has nothing to do with that estimate we created. Now, even if there was an estimate there and it asked us if we wanted to pull from that estimate, we don't have to. We can go ahead and just get out of that window and invoice for anything we like. I'm just going to come down here and we're going to invoice him for some blueprints. We'll just say a quantity of 2 of these at $500 each. And then that makes $1,000, which is non-taxable. And that's really all I have to do here. You're familiar with everything else here. I'm going to go ahead and add a customer message down at the bottom. And then I'll go ahead and save and close. And I want to make sure this shows up on our reports. If you notice, the open invoices is still here and it says refresh needed. That basically means that when I click there, it's going to go ahead and update the report for me, and you can see now that there are 3 invoices there for the sunroom. And that's really all there is to actually invoicing when you're not pulling from an estimate. It's not too much different from what we did the first time. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up, and let's move over to Section 5, where we're going to talk about receiving customer payments. Now we get to the really fun stuff where we actually talk a little bit about receiving customer payments. It's always great when we have money coming in the door, and I want to show you how to actually go ahead and do this the right way in QuickBooks so that you zero out your invoice, and then we'll talk after receiving customer payments about how you put the money in the bank. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and we'll talk about receiving customer payments. When you receive a payment from a customer, you're going to want to go ahead and enter it here where it says Receive Payments. The first thing it asks you in this window is, who did you receive the money from? And I'm going to pick Tom Allen's sunroom. And you'll notice that once I do that, a couple things happen. First of all, it pre-populates all of the invoices that are still open for Tom down here at the bottom of the window. Also, it tells me the total that the customer owes right up here. What I'm going to do is plug in the amount of money that the customer paid. Let's say that Tom paid $924.93. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that down at the bottom, it checks off the very first one. It assumes all of the money was to pay the first one. If there was any remaining money, it would be applied to the second one, and so on and so forth. And you want to be really careful there, because what if the customer had said they wanted to apply that money to the second one? Or maybe they said they want to pay half on one and half on the other. You can actually check off the ones the customer is paying, and then way over to the right here, you can type in the amount of money they're paying towards that invoice. If you don't pay particular attention to that, what will happen is further down the line, you and the customer will be having a meeting because you won't have the same set of books on both sides. So pay a lot of attention to that. The next thing you'll notice is you have to put in the date of the payment. Let's say that it was on the 23rd of December. And then the next thing is, how did the customer pay you? You'll notice currently it says reference number. If I chose cash, it'll say reference number. If I choose check, it'll say check number. If I choose credit or debit, you're going to see this pop up. You do not need to enter this information unless you've signed up with the Intuit Merchant Services, because what happens is if you type the card number in, then it will run their card. But if you're not signed up with the Intuit Merchant Services, then this does you no good. Just X out of that and it'll still stay on the debit or credit option so that you will know how the customer paid. You can choose the e-check option. Over here, you've got different payment methods. You'll see there's MasterCard, barter, and PayPal. Make sure that you actually choose barter if someone does barter this, and that way you can actually zero the invoice. The other thing is, what if you need to add a new payment method? You would just click Add New Payment Method, type in the name of that payment method. Let's say it's Square in this case. And then we'll go ahead and choose a payment type. In this case, we'll say Other and click OK. And now what you'll notice is that Square is on the list forever so that I can choose it for future payments. A couple of other things just to be aware of. Up at the top, you have a couple of tabs again, and under the main tab, you'll know what a lot of these are already. Here's your Find option right here. We can search through all the customer payments for specific ones we might be looking for. Here's a way to create a new customer payment. Remember, it's going to save this one and create a new blank one for you. Here's a way to delete that payment. And then you can print. You do have the ability to print the payment, and just to show you what it's going to look like, I'll preview this. And it's just basically what they call a payment receipt, and it looks like this. Alright, I'm going to hit close at the top. Get out of that. You can also email that same payment if you wanted to. You can also attach a file. We've talked about that. And then you can also look up a customer and an invoice if you wanted to. Now the open ones are here, but what if the one the customer said that they're wanting to pay is not on this list? It might be that they've already paid it or you applied it incorrectly, and you can go and search for a customer invoice this way and just see what's going on. You can also unapply a payment. That basically just unchecks whatever was checked down here, and I'll go ahead and check it back again. You might also apply a discount or a credit. A lot of times a customer might have terms of something like 2% 10 net 30. You would give a customer those terms if you want to get the customer to pay you a little bit earlier than they normally would. In that case, you probably gave them a small discount for doing that, and here's where you could go and apply that discount or that credit. You may have a situation where a customer has a returned check, their check bounced, and you need to record that. All you have to do is record it right here and it'll set everything up the right way for you. Obviously, here's where Intuit can sell you the credit card processing if you wanted to go check out all the features of those options. Under the Reports tab, there's several different reports you can run, and you can see those here. And then also under the Payments tab, that's where they have that credit card processing again if you want to check that out. I do have a question for you though. Where is this payment going to go once I hit Save and Close at the bottom? Well, let me show you where it's going to go. I'm going to go back to the chart of accounts for just a moment because I want to show you this account right here called Undeposited Funds. If you look all the way to the right, there's a balance of $3,364.93 in that account. This is all of the payments you've received that you have not yet put in the bank. A good way to keep a check on yourself is if you know that everything's been deposited, but yet this has money in it, then you need to figure out what happened. I'm going to go back to the receive payment window. So the question is, where does the payment go? And the money's going to go into undeposited funds. Now I want to just show you something. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close at the bottom. And I'm going to save my transaction. I want to flip back over to a couple of these reports. I'm going to go to open invoices. You'll see now there's only 2 that are there. And if I flip back to the customer balance detail report, you'll see there are the 3 invoices and the payment that we just received. Now let's talk about something that we actually saw when we were in the preferences. I'm going to go back up to edit preferences for a moment. And when we looked at the payments option on the left, company preferences, I had mentioned this option right here, use undeposited funds as default deposit to account. If I uncheck that and click OK, I want to show you what happens when you're on the receive payment window. I'm going to go back to home, and I'm going to go back and pull up my customer center. That's the easiest way to get back to that payment. This is Tom Allen Sunroom, and I'm going to double click on that payment we received. This is a little bit different now. Now I get a choice of where I'd like to deposit the money. Notice undeposited funds is still on the list, but so are my bank accounts. If I knew this was the only payment that was going to be in this deposit, I could skip the next step we're going to talk about and just put it directly in the checking account and I'm done. But that's not going to work if you have more than one payment in a single deposit. You want to make sure that your bank statement matches QuickBooks. If you have more than one payment that's in a single deposit, you still want to put each one in undeposited funds. And then when we go to the next step where we talk about making our deposits, that's where you're going to see those 2 be pulled into a single deposit. That's going to be the difference right there. If this confuses you, don't even worry about it. Just put everything in undeposited funds. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. And if I've made a change, I'll save it. And I want to show you one more quick thing. If I open up the invoice that we just paid, you're going to notice that it actually says that it was paid and it gives you the date that it was paid right here. Even if there's 1 penny left, it will not say paid on this particular invoice, but this one is paid in full. I'm going to hit save and close at the bottom, and that's how you actually receive payments. I want to go ahead now and flip over to the next section and show you how to make deposits. Now that we've actually gone through and received some payments from our customers, we can go ahead and make a deposit. I want to go through this section, which is section 6, and talk to you about how to take that money that you've received for customer payments and actually put it into a deposit and actually have that show up in your checkbook register. Let's flip over to QuickBooks and I will show you how to make a deposit. When you're ready to actually make a deposit, what you'll want to do is actually follow your flow chart all the way to the record deposits option right here. You'll notice the little 3 that you see indicates there are 3 sets of monies that are sitting in undeposited funds right now waiting to be pulled into a deposit. Now before I click on that, I just want to talk for a moment about something that I see often that will cause you problems. A lot of times people will get to the step where they receive the payments over here, and when they go to make a deposit, they'll actually go to the checkbook register and type it in. Here's the problem with that. Number one, if you do that, the money sits in undeposited funds at this point, and it just grows and grows and grows. And you want that to be 0 every single time you've actually deposited all of the money you've received. That's the first thing. The next thing is, if you go to the check register and you try to type this in, What's going to happen is you're going to type, and the first thing it will ask you for here is a payee. If you had several different customers that had paid you, you obviously couldn't put all three on that one line. That's not such a big deal. What would happen next is you would go over here where it says deposit and put in the total. But here's where the real problem is going to come in right here, where you have to pick something from the chart of accounts. Most of the time what I see people do is they will pick one of their income accounts right here. And you don't want to do that because now you're doubling that income. QuickBooks decided this was income at the time that you created the actual invoice itself. Here, you will be doubling it if you tell it it's income again. The other thing I see people do is they will also sometimes pick the accounts receivable account, which is right here, and that's wrong because you've already been there, done that. It was accounts receivable when you created the invoice. There is no correct way to enter it in this window. You need to actually follow the flow chart all the way on the home screen and choose the record deposits option right here. This is a listing right here of all of the monies that you've collected that you haven't yet deposited. A couple of ways you can view this window. You'll notice right now I'm looking at all the types of monies I've received. I could look at just the debit card transactions or maybe just the cash and checks, but typically I leave that on all types. You can also sort this list by payment method, by name, amount, whichever one of these you want to sort it by. Again, I usually just leave that on payment method. There's really no reason for me to have to change that. When you go down this list, you'll want to check off the ones that are going in this particular deposit. If you're going to have two of these and have a single deposit in the bank for $24.40 like you see here, then after you check those two off, you click OK, and later you come back in and check this one off. Just make sure that your deposit total matches what actually was deposited into the bank. That way it's easier to go ahead and reconcile. You'll have a hard time if you put these in one at a time. I'm going to go ahead and check all three in this case and click OK. And you'll see that it populated all three of these into my deposit here. A couple of quick things. First of all, make sure you're depositing to the correct bank account. Often when someone says to me, I know I made that deposit, they've put it in the wrong account. The other thing is make sure you have the correct date for your deposit. And then it will put the word deposit here automatically in the memo. You can change that if you need to say something particular. When you're looking down here at the three items that it brought in, do not change this account right here because this is where the money actually came from. When we received the payment, it went into undeposited funds. Now we're pulling it out of undeposited funds so that we can actually save this in a moment and it will be in our checkbook. You do have the ability to put a memo in here for each of these lines if you'd like to do that. You'll see there's a place for the check number if you forgot to put one in on the receive payment window, or now maybe you want to put something else in that field, you can. You have your class field here, and then of course the amount over here. You can also add something to this. If you happen, for example, to have a little bit of cash you want to throw in there, then go ahead and put in whichever one of these customers you would want to use, or if it's just cash that you yourself put in here, you really don't have to put anything in that particular field. You do have to fill in the from account field though. That's mandatory. Think about if you as the business owner put money into the business, then it's considered an owner contribution, and that's the one you'd want to pick here. What if it's something like a rebate? Then you would go ahead and put it to the account that you used when you actually purchased the item to begin with. For example, if you purchased a new printer, and let's say from the drop-down list you have picked an expense account, maybe office expenses, then use that same account here so that it zeroes it out. You can put as many items as you want here. A couple things down at the bottom. You'll notice it says cash back goes to. As a business, you cannot get cash back when you go to the bank to make a deposit, but as a sole proprietor with a personal account, you could. You would just pick the particular account that you want the cash back to go to. You would have the memo if you had one and the amount that you wanted to keep, and then it would deduct it from this total over here. Now, a couple of quick quick things at the top I just want to point out. I want to point out that you have the ability to use your next or previous buttons to look through your deposits if you happen to be looking for a particular one. You could save this. You could also print this, and I want to show you the two versions that you would be able to print. Here's a deposit slip. I'll just go ahead and preview that for you. And you can see it looks just like this. However, I think the one you're going to want to use is going to be the deposit summary. And this is what the deposit summary looks like right here. You can actually just attach that and send it to the bank if you want, or keep it for your records. The other thing I want to mention is if when you were in that first window where you checked off the payments you wanted to pull in, and let's say you checked off the wrong ones, go ahead and hit this payments option right here, and if you had some in there, you could go and check off some that you didn't automatically pull in. I pulled all 3 in, and that's why I have this window here, so I'll go ahead and cancel that. You can also look at a history for this deposit. This will actually show you all of the payments right here that are going to be in this deposit. And if you wanted to actually go to one of these, you could actually just go directly to it, and then you could edit this payment, or if you wanted to just look at it and close it, you could do that as well. And the last thing is you have the ability to attach a file to this. This could be any file at all that you feel pertains to this deposit. Notice the total, because we're going to see this in the register in a moment. The total is $3,364.93. I'm going to go ahead and save and close, and that actually completes that whole line all the way across. Now let's go look in the register and see if we see that deposit. And you'll see there it is right there at the bottom. Now the reason you see the blue line is because anything below it is post dated. Remember, for the practice file, it thinks today is December the 15th. Notice a couple of other things. It says split. That's because there were 3 different transactions on that deposit. And then also notice the fact that there is no payee. Again, that's because there were 3 different payees and it couldn't put them all in that one line right there. And that's really all you need to know. That's how your deposits are going to work. Just remember, like I said, don't type them in here. You want to actually follow the flow chart all the way to the very end so that everything goes to the correct accounts. That's how you're going to make deposits in QuickBooks. Let's go ahead now and go over into section 7 and talk a little bit about how to create credit memos. We are all the way down now to section 7 of module 4, and in this particular section I want to talk to you a little bit about creating credit memos. There are times when a customer may actually return an item that they've purchased and you need to either credit their account or possibly give them a refund. Sometimes you might want to create a credit memo just to sit on the customer's account for future use. It's going to work the same way no matter what the end result is. Let me go ahead and show you how to go to QuickBooks and set up those credit memos. Whenever you need to create a credit memo or refund a customer, you're going to choose this option here that says Refunds and Credits. The first thing you'll want to do is go ahead and choose the customer and the job that you want to create the credit memo for. Make sure you always click the job, and also choose the correct class. There are also different templates for credit memos. We're going to talk in a later module about how to create new templates for invoices, credit memos, any kind of form, and that's where we'll look at customizing that or creating a new one. You want to go ahead and choose the date of the credit memo. I'll just make it January the 7th. And also, you'll notice that with credit memos, it's just like any other form in QuickBooks that has numbers. It will always start with number 1 and number sequentially. If you don't like this particular number, you can type whatever number you want, and the next one will be numbered the next number when you get around to creating that credit memo. It should have brought in the customer information here. And now let's go down and talk about the items. I'm going to click on the first line there and drop down my items list. Think about it this way. If a customer returns a wooden door and you had actually sold them that wood door originally and it took it out of inventory If they bring it back, you want to put it back into your inventory, and that's why you would pick the exact same item that they bought to begin with. Now in this case, they're returning the wood door, and we can type any description we want right here. If we want to put in return or anything we want, that's certainly okay. We're going to put in the quantity, and then let's go ahead and put in the rate of 540. And notice that it's also going to return the sales tax, and you want to make sure it does that, because if you charge sales tax to begin with, make sure that the customer gets their sales tax back as well, and that'll keep that side of things going correctly. You can also just create a credit memo that sits on their account. So let's say that they didn't want to return the wood door, they just wanted to have a credit because maybe you had told them that they were only going to be charged for 5 hours of framing, but yet you charge them for 10 hours. There's many different scenarios here. Just remember, if it's inventory that you sold, you want to put it back in the inventory. If not, you can just pick any of these other items on the list. A couple things down at the bottom, you'll notice this is the tax rate that's going to be returned. And it also shows you the remaining credit memo amount down here at the bottom. On the left, you have the ability to add a customer message. You've also got a place for a memo, and it does have the customer tax code at the bottom. Back up at the top, I don't think any of this is new, but here's your find options we've talked about several times now. Here's your new option if you wanted to save this credit memo and create a new one. Here's your save option where you can actually save this credit memo or refund, or save it as a PDF if you prefer. Here's where you can delete this, create a copy. We can memorize it, mark it as pending, or any of these other things that we've already talked about. Now here's a couple of things that are new that are pertinent just to credit memos. We can actually use this credit to give our customer a refund. If the customer has paid in full, then you would want to give them a refund. You could also use this credit to apply to an invoice. Let me go ahead and show you, if you give them a refund, what the screen looks like here. Notice it pops up and says issue a refund. It's got a refund is due to, so it has our customer and job. It has the refund amount. It has the date. And over here, it's assuming you want to refund them with a check, but I could refund them with cash, or if I want to put it back on their credit card, you can see any of those choices. And it does give you the ending balance in your bank account at this particular moment, so you'll know that you have enough money to refund them. And then you can see it has a memo down here, and that's pretty much all you need to do. Now what would happen here is if I left this on check and I click OK, this is actually going to put a transaction in the checkbook register. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And notice it says refunded right here. And I'm going to save and close. And let's go into the check register and see what it looks like. I'm going to use my checking. And now what you want to do is look for that particular transaction. Now what we want to do is look on December the 15th here. And we're going to go ahead and look all the way down this list and see if we see our refund. And there it is right there. It's for Tom Allen's sunroom. And it's already deducted it from the register. And notice the account that it shows, accounts receivable. Don't change that. That's where it should automatically be. Now if you had a check number that you wanted to put here, you can just type over that to print and put whatever check number you wanted to. And just make sure you record it when you're done. And that's pretty much how that's going to work. Now let me just go back and show you one more thing. I'm going to go back to home. If when I went to refunds and credits, I had filled out this entire screen and I did not choose one of these, what would happen is when I went down to save and close at the bottom, it would automatically pop up and ask me which one of these I wanted to use. It would actually have one additional choice on the list. It would ask me if I wanted to leave this credit memo on their account for future use. And that's pretty much all you need to do when you're creating a credit memo. I'm going to go ahead and close this window and go back to the home screen. The next thing I want to talk to you about is over in section 8, how to create customer statements. We've made it all the way down to section 8, where we're going to talk about creating customer statements. Some businesses like to send a statement to their customers at the end of the month. A statement basically lets the customer know that they started the month owing X amount of money, then it'll show all the transactions that happened during the current month, and then it'll tell the customer what they owe at the very bottom. Statements are really easy to create in QuickBooks. It's an option. You don't have to do this, but it is a nice gentle reminder to your customer that they owe you money, or sometimes it might be just to show the customer that they've paid up. Let me go ahead and show you how to create statements in QuickBooks. To create a statement in QuickBooks, you're going to use the Statements button right here. Typically, when you send a statement, you want to date it for the last day of the month, and that way you capture all the transactions from the beginning of that month to the end of that month. We're just going to go ahead and change all this to December 1 through December 31, and then you'll notice the statement date is the end of the month. You do have a couple of choices here. For customers, for example, you can choose all the customers. You can send a statement to multiple. If you choose multiple, it lets you choose the ones you'd like to send. You can also send this to one customer in particular. You can just pick that one customer from the list. You can choose customers of a particular type. When you set up your customers, you might have had residential or commercial customers, and you can choose whichever ones you want there, or only people who have a preferred send method. Let's go ahead and choose all customers. Now over on the right, these are some template options at the top. There are different templates available for statements, and you can choose the one that's here or customize and create your own. You can choose to send a statement to each customer or to each customer and a separate one for each job. There's a couple of check boxes here that you might want to look at. It might be that you want to send statements to only customers in a particular zip code. It could be down here that you don't want to send customers that have a zero balance a statement, or maybe if they owe you less than $1 or if they didn't have any activity. You can kind of see the list right there. All you have to do when you're finished checking off all of these options is just hit the preview real quick just to make sure that it looks okay. And then this is what a statement actually looks like. Let's see if I can zoom in a little more here. You can see that this is for Tom Allen, and it has the balance forward at the end of November, which was 0. And then you can see all of the invoices for his sunroom. There was a check and then also a payment there. And you can see at the bottom how much Tom owes. Now it also tells you how much the customer owes for each of these categories. 1 to 30 days, 31 to 60, 61 to 90. You can kind of see that. And that's all a statement is. You just print those out and send those to your customer. Once you're done, you just hit close, and you don't have to do this again until the next month. And that's how statements work. Let's go ahead and go over to the last section in this module and talk a little bit about how the income tracker works before we wrap up Module 4. We're down on the last section of Module 4 now, and this is going to be Section 9. I want to show you real quick how the income tracker works in QuickBooks. When you're talking about customers, you have the ability to see a screen that lists all of your customers and their open transactions, overdue transactions, things like that on one screen. And then you can actually go in and maybe receive payments or something similar with multiple customers, again, all on one screen. Let me flip over to QuickBooks and I'll show you how to get to the income tracker, and I'll show you how it also works. In order to access the income tracker, you're going to have to use the menu. I'm going to go up to the menu and click on Customers, and then you'll notice Income Tracker right here. The first thing I want you to notice when you're looking at this list is that you can see at the top a total for all of your estimates that you still have outstanding. You're going to be able to see a total of anything you have as far as time and expenses, open invoices, if you have any overdue, and any that were paid in the last 30 days. Now you can customize these options a little bit by coming up to the little gear icon that you see. And if you don't want to see estimates, for example, or you don't want to see time and expenses, you can uncheck those. I'll uncheck estimates and click OK. And now notice that's not on the list here. Again, to turn that back on, I would just do the same thing and go back and check estimates. Looking down the list, you'll see it's a list of your customers, you'll see the type of transaction, and you can just see all the information about the transaction all the way across. A couple things you're going to be able to do. If you notice, I'm on an invoice currently, and if I go all the way over here where it says Action, I can go down and receive a payment, print that row, or email that row. A really good way to use this screen is if you received a lot of payments today, you can actually just go down and click on all the ones that you need to go ahead and use the receive payment option for, and then it takes you right to that payment window, and it's a quick way just to put a whole bunch of them in all at once. If you happen to be on an estimate, as an example down here, your options will be a tad different. You'll be able to convert it to an invoice, mark it as inactive, print the row, or email the row. So depending on what type of transaction it is, you're going to have different choices. The other thing you can do is you can do some batch actions like you see down here at the bottom. Whichever customers you have selected, and you can go down the list and check or uncheck different ones here, but you can actually create invoices for all of these as a batch or send a batch email. That's really a better example. Also, where it says Manage Transactions here, you're going to be able to go in for each of these and create an estimate, an invoice, any of those options that you see as well. So it's just a way of seeing all of your transactions in one window, and that way if you wanted to go through and quickly just receive payments or one of those features we saw, it's a little easier to do when you see everything in one window, very similar to an Excel spreadsheet. And that's all the income tracker is. You can actually close it with the X at the top, and that takes you back to the home screen in this particular case. Well, that's going to go ahead and wrap up Module 4, where we've been talking about working with customers and jobs. Take a few moments and make sure you're okay with everything, and then I want you to head over to Module 5, and we're going to talk about working with vendors. We are now going to start talking a little bit about working with vendors, which is the accounts payable side of QuickBooks. This is Module 5, Working with Vendors, and we're on Section 1, where I want to start off just talking to you a little bit about how to set up your vendors and how to actually see what's going on with your vendor center. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and we'll start talking about vendors. We're going to be talking in this module about working with this section right here of QuickBooks, which is your accounts payable. Remember, this section has to do with bills that come in the mail that you have to pay. The first thing you'll want to do is set up your vendors. And vendors are people or businesses that buy from you. You have a vendor center, which you can access right here. And it's going to look just like the customer center, except it holds vendor information. Looking down the list here on the left, you'll see all of your vendors in alphabetical order. And you'll notice with vendors, you don't have any items that are indented under any of these. They're all just going to be on one straight line like you see here. You can see the balance that you owe the vendor. And also you can attach a file that might have something to do with the vendor over here. I'm currently looking at all of the active vendors. I can see this right here. I could click this down arrow and look at all of the vendors, maybe just ones with an open balance, or go in and do some custom filtering if I want to see certain items from the list. One of the things that happens often is that people do not put all of their bills in QuickBooks, and therefore all of their vendors are not in here. And what happens is when you go to do some different things like a budget in QuickBooks, or you want to run reports and see who you owe, it's not really going to be accurate if you haven't put all the bills in here. So make sure you do that, and then that'll pre-populate all of your vendors as well. When you're clicked on a particular vendor, you will see the information about the vendor, like their address, their phone number, things like that. You also have a couple of quick reports for vendors. You can see those right over here. There's also one for an open balance. Let's look at your tabs down at the bottom. These are just like the tabs that we saw when we were looking at customers. The first thing you'll notice is you have a tab that shows you all the transactions for that vendor. In this case, for Bayshore Water, we can see there are several different checks we've written. And if we want to go to one, we just double click on that check. And then we can either just look at this and close it, or we can make a change to it and then save it. Let me go ahead and close that. You've also got a tab that says Contacts. If there's a particular contact at your vendor's company that you would like to keep track of, you can track this here. Remember to enter a contact. You'll go down here where it says Manage Contacts and you'll choose Add New. You also have to-dos, and we had talked about these when we talked about customers, and we had talked about these previously. Remember that to-dos are things you have to take care of related to this vendor. It could be that you have to make a phone call, set up a meeting, those types of things. You've also got a place to track all your notes. Whenever you have a conversation with your vendor, you can keep track of all that here. And also, if you send your vendor any emails through QuickBooks, you will see those listed here as well. Let's talk now about setting up a new vendor. All you have to do is come right up here where it says New Vendor and choose the New Vendor option. The first thing you'll want to do is give your vendor a name, and let's just go ahead and call this one Tim Specialties. There is a place for the opening balance. This would be if you owed your vendor any money as of the start date of your company file. You could plug in that balance. What I like to do is leave this blank and not put anything here and go back and actually put in all of the bills that I owed my vendor as of the start date of my company file. The first tab that you'll see here is the address info. This is where you can plug in information like the name of the company. You can put in the full name of the vendor. Let's see that the company name is Tim's Specialties. We'll just plug that in here. And we'll say that it is Tim Smith. You can go down and put in Tim's job title. Maybe he's the owner of the company. You can put in the phone number, the fax, the email. And if you want any of these fields to represent something different, go ahead and choose it from the drop-down list like you see here. You're going to end up with Tim's Specialties address info right here. So that way if you're sending correspondence out, then you'll be able to pull in that address. And let's go ahead and populate this. We'll just say it's 124 River Street, Savannah, Georgia, and we'll just leave the zip. The next thing is the payment settings over on the left. Now, if you notice, I didn't put in the zip code and it recognized that, and so it pops up the edit address information and gives me a chance to put the zip in. If I don't know it or don't want to put it in right now, I can just click OK and get past that. I'm on the Payment Settings tab, and here I can put in my account number with the vendor if I happen to have one. I can put in any terms I have with that vendor. When I print a check for that vendor, what name would Tim like to appear on his checks? I can set a credit limit for that vendor. What that would do is if I put in a bill and I exceed my credit limit, it will pop up and say, would you still like to buy something? And also there can be different billing rates that possibly the vendor set up. If I do certain work with this vendor, they might charge me one fee, and if I do something else, they might charge me a different fee. The next thing on the left is your tax settings. One of the things I mentioned to you way back in the beginning when we went through the Easy Step interview was the fact that there was a question that said, do you do payroll? And in there, one of the check boxes was that you have 1099 contractors. I had said to you at that time that 1099 contractors have absolutely nothing to do with payroll. They are actually set up as vendors, and here's where you would set that up. You would put in your vendor's tax ID number, and then if they're eligible for 1099, you would just check the box. This is how QuickBooks knows when it needs to print 1099s at the end of the year who gets a 1099. The next tab over are your account settings. If you wanted, whenever you put in a check as an example or a bill, for it to pre-populate 3 accounts from your chart of accounts, you could do that. Other than that, it's just going to pull the previous one. And the last thing is the additional info tab. You might have different vendor types that you want to track. And we also talked when we were setting up customers about the fact that you can come over to this section and choose your define fields and set up any fields you would want to appear for customers, vendors, and or employees. I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. And let's see if our new vendor is in the list. If you remember with customers that had put the new one at the top of the list, here it's going to go ahead and put them in alphabetical order. I just kind of clicked on the word name there to sort it, and you'll see there's Tim Specialties right here. And now I can go ahead and add another one if I needed to do that. Now, one other quick thing you can do, when I go back to the new vendor option, if I have several vendors to add, I can just add multiple vendors all on one screen. I don't have to add them one at a time. All you have to do is go to the bottom of this list here, and there is a blank one where you can start typing in the new vendor. You could also, if you have an Excel spreadsheet with your vendors already set up and you have the columns set up the way you see here, you can just copy and paste them all and it's done. When you're finished, you just hit Save Changes at the bottom, and then all of those new vendors will be in the vendor list. And that's really all there is to working with your vendors. Let's go ahead now and go over to section 2 and talk a little bit about entering bills. We are working in Module 5, and we're talking in this module about working with vendors. We're all the way on section 2 now. We've already talked about how to set up the vendors. Now that you have a vendor set up, you can go ahead and start entering some bills. Remember that bills come in the mail that you have to pay. You can run reports on bills to see who you owe, if it's over 30 days, that sort of thing. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and talk a little bit about how to enter those bills. There are a couple of things I wanted to tell you about bills. If you actually work with the purchase order system and you actually receive items into your inventory, then you would actually use the flow chart going in this direction, and it would eventually take you to this enter bills right here. This is the same screen, it's just if you use this one, it's like entering an electric bill or something like that where you didn't use the purchase order system. I'm going to go ahead and click on Enter Bills. The first thing you'll want to know about the bill screen is just like with your invoicing and your estimates, you can come over here and hide the history if you want, and that way you have more room on your screen to work. The first thing you'll want to notice up here is the fact that it defaults to the fact that this is a bill, but it could be a credit. Sometimes your vendor may send you a credit for something, and you'll see it says credit when you choose that option. I'll go back and choose bill. And then it asks you who is your vendor. When we look down this list, we're going to go ahead and say that it's Cal Gas and Electric, and they've sent us the electric bill. You'll notice it pre-populates the address for us, and if we had the terms already set up, then it would populate that for us as well. If you get in here and you decide the terms are different, just go ahead and change them to what they should be. You do have a place for the discount date as well. Sometimes a vendor will give you terms of, for example, 2% 10 net 30, and that means that the bill is due in 30 days, but if you pay it in 10 days, you can take 2% off, and this is where that 10-day date would appear. This is the date right here that's actually printed on the bill. You want to actually use that date, not the date that you decided to open the mail or decide to sit down and put it in QuickBooks. It needs to be the date that's actually on the bill. And the reason for that is because the due date down here is the really important date for pulling reports and things like that. You want to make sure that date is correct. In this case, it should be 30 days from this date to this date. Now, if you happen to be looking at the bill and it just says it's due on the 15th of January, for example, just change that. Remember, this is the important date right here. Back up to the reference number, if you think about it, this is an invoice on the vendor's end and it's a bill on your end. Their bill number is what you would plug in here. That way when you mail them a check or you have a payment, it knows which bill to associate it with. And then you're going to put in the amount, $252.79. Now, if you've changed the terms for Cal Gas and Electric, then when you go to save it, it's going to ask you, would you like to save these? I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel for a moment and finish filling out the rest of this. You'll notice down at the bottom you have an expenses tab and an items tab. The expenses tab will list your chart of accounts, and in this case that happens to be utilities, gas, and electric. And it pulled this because they've entered Cal Gas and Electric before, and so it's just pulling the information from the previous one. You can actually break this down into multiple line items if you need to do that for some reason. You can also break this down between expenses and items if you need to do that. Both tabs have to total this to the penny or it will not let you save it. If you're using the job feature, you will want to come over and choose the customer and the job that this might relate to. Now, if this is just for the office, you really don't have to pick a customer and a job, but if you want to keep your job costing consistent, and this does pertain to a customer and job, make sure you fill it in right here. And also, if you're using the class feature, you'll want to use that right there. Let's head up to the top of our screen and see what we've got. First of all, here's the Find feature. Remember that if you use the arrows, it will take you to the previous or the next bill. And remember, in QuickBooks, everything is in date order. And if you can't find it using those arrows, just click your Find option here, and you'll be able to search by vendor or by amount or any of the criteria that you might already know. Here's where you're going to create a new bill. Remember, that's going to save this one, and it's going to put you on a new blank bill so that you can fill out another one. That's the same thing as Save and New down at the bottom. Here's where you're going to be able to delete this bill. You can also create a copy. If this is something that happens every single month, and maybe it happens at pretty much the same time, and just the amount changes, just like it would be for an electric bill, you could go ahead and create a copy of this and then change the amount you need to for the next one, and that's all you'd have to do. You could also memorize this, and memorize basically means that if I don't want to have to remember to put this bill in QuickBooks every month, QuickBooks can do it for me automatically, and then I'll just change the amount as I need to. You can also come in and print this, and just to show you what this would look like, and yes, I'm going to say I've changed my terms over here. But if I print this, basically it looks just like this, where it says bill at the top and it says expenses right here, and you can see that the total of the bill is $252.79. I'm going to close that. You can attach a file. If you happen to have maybe a purchase order or some file that you'd like to attach to this for easy access, you can certainly do that here. If you were using the purchase order system, it could be that you want to go in and select the particular purchase order that this bill applies to. You could also enter some time here that might be related to this bill in some way. You could clear the splits. What that basically means is if you have more than one line item down here, for example, that's called a split. Or if you had some of this under the expenses and some of it under the items, that would be a split as well, and you could clear those. You could also have QuickBooks recalculate if the numbers aren't matching up. You can have it recalculate for you, and you can choose to pay the bill. Now, chances are you're not going to be on this screen when you want to pay this bill, but you could if you were already here. The next tab over are the reports that have to do with your bills. You can see that you can run a quick report or transaction history on this particular bill. You could also run a transaction journal, which would just show you a timeline of basically where the bill was put in. Maybe if you'd paid the bill already, you could see those things. You can look at an item listing, open purchase orders, a vendor balance detail, unpaid bills detail, and purchase orders by vendor detail. And that's really all you have to do when you're entering a bill. You just fill this out and hit save and close at the bottom, and now that bill is in here. If I go back to the vendor center on the left and I find Cal Gas and Electric and click on it, you will see that the bill that we entered is now in here, And the next thing we need to do is go ahead and pay that bill. So let's go ahead and head over to section 3 and we'll talk a little bit about paying your bills. Okay, we've been talking about working with vendors here in Module 5. We're all the way down to Section 3 now, and I want to talk to you about paying your bills. We've already gone through and entered the bills. Now all we have to do is check off the ones that we want to pay. It's a pretty simple process, so I'm going to flip over to QuickBooks and I will show you where you go to pay your bills. Once you've entered the bill over here, you want to go straight across and follow the flow chart to the Pay Bills option here. Before I click on that, I just want to mention something. What you don't want to do is enter a bill here and then come down and either write a check or put it in the check register. And the reason for that is because it doesn't know there's any association between this check you're writing and this Enter Bills feature here. If you follow the flow chart and go over to the Pay Bills here, then it will actually put that check in the register for you once you've completed this step. I'm going to click on Pay Bills. You're looking at a list of all the bills that you owe money on, even if you owe a penny. And currently you can see that they're sorted by vendor, and that's probably the best way to do this because then all of CU Electric is together, Cal Gas and Electric is together, and so forth. But notice you could sort these by the due date. If you want to look at them by the amount due, things like that, you can sort that way. You can also filter this list. If you just wanted to see all of the bills for Cal Gas and Electric, you can choose it, and notice how it hides everything else on the list. If you're wanting to see all of these, make sure you go and choose all vendors from the top of the list, and then you'll see they come back. Also notice that I'm showing all of the bills like I mentioned, but I might only want to look at ones due before a certain date, and I can choose that date right here. I'm going to go ahead and pay Cal Gas and Electric. And there's actually two. There's the one that we did, and let's say we had another one in here already that we wanted to pay as well. All you do is you check off the bills that you want to pay, and it will assume you're paying all of that bill. Now, if you're just paying a portion, just come over here and type in whatever you are paying. It will remember the balance, and then you'll see it for the next time. Down at the bottom here, the first thing you'll see is there's an option that says Go to Bill. One of the few places in QuickBooks that you can't double click on a transaction to go to it is right here in this Bills window. So you'll need to make sure the one you're actually clicked on is the one you want to go to. The next thing you can do is you can set your discount. If you had terms of 2% 10 net 30, for example, then you can go ahead and pull this up and type in the amount of the discount you're going to take, and also the account that would be associated with that. You might need to set one up. You would call it discounts taken. All right, I'm going to cancel that. Also, if you had a credit memo that you hadn't applied yet to an invoice, you would just select the invoice you want to apply it to, choose Set Credits, and it would list any credits available in the list here, and you would check off the one you want, and you would just say Done. The next thing you have is the payment date. I'll just say it's December 31st. The method, are you going to pay for this with a check or a credit card, or are you hooked up for online banking? And the next thing is, do you want the check number field to say to be printed, and that way you can print a batch of these if you need to, or would you like to go ahead and assign a check number yourself? I'm going to show you what happens if you choose that one. And then make sure you have the correct account chosen here that you'd like to go ahead and write that check from. And say Pay Selected Bills. Notice that it brought up my check. It's one check for both of the bills. I'll be able to type anything I want in that check number field. You just want to be consistent with whatever it is that you're typing here, and that way you can find things when you're looking for them in a list. I'm going to click OK, and that bill is now paid. This is actually asking me if I want to pay more bills or am I done. I'm just going to say Done. I mentioned to you that once you go through the Pay Bills window, it would be in the register. Let's go ahead and head over to the check register and check it out. And there's Cal Gas and Electric right there at the bottom. Now, something else I want to mention to you. Often what happens is people will say to me, I know that I paid a specific bill, but it still shows up as being unpaid when I run a report. And here's how you can tell what happened. If you notice, some of these just say check, and then some of these say bill payment. If I did this the correct way, meaning if I entered the bill and went through the flowchart to pay bills, then what it would look like in the register is right here where it says bill payment. That's the correct way to do it. If I just saw somewhere it said check, that tells me that there was no association between that bill and this check that someone wrote. And so what they would have to do is delete this check and go put it in the correct way, and then that bill would not appear on their unpaid bills report anymore. And that's really all there is to paying your bills. Just make sure you enter bills and pay bills, and then you are done. We've got one more thing in this particular module we need to cover, and that is working with credit memos. Let's head on over to section 4. We're in the last section in Module 5. We've been talking about working with vendors. I want to go ahead and talk to you in this section about how to enter the credit memos that your vendors may send you to apply towards a bill or upcoming bills. This is Section 4, Credit Memos. To enter a credit memo that a vendor has sent you, use the Enter Bills window. And all you're going to do is you're going to check the option that says Credit and then put in the vendor name. Let's say this is Cal Telephone, and we're going to put in the date of that credit memo. I'll go ahead and change this to the 24th. You would fill in the reference number if there was one, and then put in the amount of the credit memo. We're going to say it's $25. I'm going to actually choose the expense account this would go to as well. In this case, it's going to be utilities, and then we'll choose telephone underneath. And remember, if this does apply to a customer or a job, you'll want to choose that here, and also choose the class if you're using the class list. Now I'm going to go ahead and save and close, and I'll show you how to apply that credit memo. I'm going to follow my flowchart over to the Pay Bills window. And when I get in here, I'm going to check off Cal Telephone. Now, if there were multiple ones for Cal Telephone, you would check the one that you want to apply the credit memo to. Down at the bottom of my screen, I have the ability to set credits, and you'll see that it tells me I have a $25 credit available. I'm going to click on that Set Credits button. And notice here is the credit memo for $25, and it's already checked. If I wanted to use a different one on the list, I would uncheck this one and check the correct one. And I'm just going to click Done. And you'll notice now that it's $66.94 and that $25 has already been applied. And that's all you have to do to actually set up the credit memos and apply them to your bills. I'm going to go ahead and pay selected bills at the bottom just to get out of that window. And if I wanted to pay it, I would go ahead and put in the check number or the word debit. If not, I can cancel that and then just cancel this window down at the bottom. That does not cancel the credit memo where it was applied. And that's all you have to do to work with credit memos. That's going to wrap up Module 5, where we've been talking about working with vendors. Let's go ahead now and move over to Module 6, where we're going to talk about working with items and inventory. We're starting on Module 6 now, and this is where I want to talk to you a little bit about working with items and inventory. Items are things that you sell to your customer, or sometimes you purchase items. If you remember back when we created our estimates, we actually pulled in 2 items onto that estimate. We pulled in framing, which was a service we provide, and we also pulled in an exterior wood door, which is an inventory part. I want to go through in this particular section, Section 1, and talk to you about how to go ahead and set up those items. We're actually going to have 2 parts to this particular section, so make sure you watch both parts, and we will talk about setting those items up and get them set up correctly. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and get started with our items. The way you're going to get to the items and services list is right over here in your home screen. You'll have an icon that says items and services. This is a list of all the items and services that your company currently has set up, and I want to show you how this list is sorted. You'll notice that these are set up by type, and if the type is the same, like you'll see all the service items in here, then all the service items are alphabetical. And that would be true for each of the different types. If you happen to come in here and your list is not sorted by type, it could be that you've clicked on one of these other headings and you've resorted it by that column. I'm going to go back and click type to sort it again. Now let's talk about the different types of items that we can have. Some of your items you provide are services. Think about when you have labor, if you have repairs. These all have to do with subcontractor services. These are all services that the company provides. The next type that you see are what we call inventory parts. True inventory means that I sell chairs and I have 6 in the back room. I'd like QuickBooks to pop up and tell me I have 2 left so that I can order some more. And that's true inventory when you want to keep a count on how many you've ordered, how many you have, and how many have gone out the door. You can see in this list that with inventory items only, it will show you the total quantity that you currently have on hand over in this list. And you'll also see the price, meaning the total for all of the ones you have. And I'll show you in a little bit why some of these have a 0 over in the price. The next type, if you go down the list, is an inventory assembly. Sometimes you have to actually purchase several different parts to make a main part, and we call that an inventory assembly. Now below that you have non-inventory parts. These are physical parts that you buy or sell in your business, but you don't care to track how many you have in the back room. When you look at this, if you think about lumber, for example, there's lots of different types of lumber, like they have trim. They don't really count that they have 10 in the back room, but they do want to know at some point how many they've had to purchase, and you can run reports to see that. Below the non-inventory, you have your other charges. And you can see these are just like miscellaneous type charges, like they have a freight reimbursement, they've got delivery charges, they've got a permit charge, things like that. Then you have what we call subtotals. Subtotals are really great because what they allow you to do is put in several items, and then the next line you can choose this subtotal option, for example, and it will subtotal anything above where you're clicked. Now, if you've got more than one subtotal, it will only subtotal the ones right above you, and if it sees a subtotal up above, it stops there. So it's not going to subtotal the entire list. A group. Construction is a prime example of using the group here, because what would happen is, let's say there are several different house plans. There are many different items that go into each one of those plans, and if you had to estimate those or put them on an invoice, you would be there forever pulling all those individual items in. What you can do is create a group, give it a name, and then tell it which items go in the group. That way, the next time you want to use this option, you just pull in the name of the group and it pre-populates all the items for you. And of course, you can make any changes that you like. There are discount items. If you'd like to be able to put a discount on your invoice, for example, you can add that as your last line and it will do the calculation for you. You can also add payments or prepayments to your invoices. I don't like to do this because let's say that you had an invoice for $1,000 and a customer paid you $200 up front and you put it all on the invoice. What that means is the actual amount that the customer owes on the invoice is $800. And if you looked at a report, all you would see is an invoice for $800. You wouldn't see anywhere that $200 they'd already paid. I personally prefer to put the entire invoice for $1,000 in, then receive the payment, and that way I can see that the balance when I'm looking at a report is $800. Below that, we have several different sales tax items and sales tax groups. We're going to be talking about sales tax in a later module, and I'll show you how that works. Some of you may end up having 6 or 7 items. Some of you may have thousands. It really just depends on your business. I want to take a few moments now and show you exactly what you need to set up when you're setting up an item. The quick way to set up any new item is just to right-click, and I want to show you that there's your new option, your edit if you wanted to delete one, You can duplicate an item if there's one that you need to create that's very similar to another one. There's also your delete option, and then you can add or edit multiple items all at once. Remember that you can't delete an item that you've used at least once in QuickBooks. That's because those numbers need to pull into your reports. If you need to delete an item, make sure that you go ahead and create a new one correctly and then move all of the corresponding entries to the new item, then you can delete this one. Or actually it's a little bit easier just to make it inactive. I'm going to go ahead and open one that's already here. We're familiar with framing, so I'll just right click and edit that one. The first thing you would have to tell QuickBooks if it was a new item is what type of item is it, and this is a service. One of the very few things in QuickBooks you can't change is, notice it won't allow me to change this from service to maybe inventory, for example. If I needed to change this, I would create a new one and make this one inactive. The first thing we have to put in is the name of the item, which is framing in this case. It's not a sub-item of another, but let me show you what a sub-item would look like. I'll flip back to the item list for a second. If you notice, this one is called subs, and underneath it they have carpet, drywall, ductwork. These are sub-items of subs. The next thing you're going to see is the unit of measurement. If you remember, I told you that there might be some items you sell by the foot, the yard, the case. You can go in and actually set that up here so that you can choose those from the drop-down list when you're on an estimate or an invoice. Description. This is what the customer will see. You're going to go ahead and put in whatever description you want to pre-populate. If it's something that will be different every single time, then just don't put anything in there at all, and you can edit it on the actual invoice itself or the estimate. Over here is the rate, how much you charge for one of these. If this rate is different every single time you use it, then you might want to just put this on 0 and change it when you're on that estimate or invoice. Tax code means for sales tax purposes, is this item subject to sales tax, yes or no? And then the most important thing here, when I actually put this item on an invoice, which account will it go back to? And in this case, it goes to labor income. Now you're going to see that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, you want these to point back to an income account. I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that one. I just wanted to show you what it actually looks like when you're setting up an item. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and create a brand new item. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the video right here, and I want you to flip over to part 2 where I go through and set up an item with you. We've already started looking at how to work with items. We actually looked at framing. What I want to do now is go ahead and set up a brand new item with you and show you exactly what you need to put in when you're actually setting up an inventory part. Let's go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks and we'll keep talking about working with items. This is section 1, part 2. The easiest way to create a new item is to right-click and choose the New option. The first thing we have to tell QuickBooks is what type of item will this new one be. Remember, framing was a service we provided. Now we're going to look at inventory parts. I want to actually call this one a screen door. It is not going to be a sub-item of another, but if it was, I would check the box and choose the item it's a sub-item of. I also have a field to put in the manufacturer's part number. This is really just informational for you. That way you have that part number handy when you're ready to order some more of these. We talked about the unit of measurement. Remember, if this is something I sell by the yard, the foot, the case, I can add a new item to this list. The way the inventory part screen is set up is you'll notice that on the left-hand side here is the information related to the purchasing. And this is the information related to when you sell that particular item. Let's start with the description. I'm going to call this screen door. If when you purchase this from your vendor, they have some other wording or maybe the part number is part of the description, you can type all of that in here. If you just hit the tab key, it'll bring that same description over to the right. Now this is the description you want to put in for customers. So this is what we'll pull when you're on an invoice or an estimate and you type in screen door. These can be the same or different. On the left is the cost. If you have an average cost that you pay for this, you can go ahead and plug it in right here. It does not mean the last time you purchased it, it was $175. It just means on average, what do you normally pay for this? If it's really all over the board, you can just leave that on 0. You do want to make sure you leave this on cost of goods sold, because remember, this is a product I have to buy to sell a product in my business. So it stays in this account called cost of goods sold. And if you have a preferred vendor, you can always pick that vendor from the list here. You can always type in the new vendor if you don't have the one you want on the list here. Over on the right, the sales price. On average, what do you sell this screen door for? It doesn't mean that every time you sell it for $225. It's just that this will pre-populate when you create an estimate or an invoice. For sales tax purposes, is this item subject to sales tax, yes or no? Typically, a service you provide is not, but a physical item is. Therefore, I'm going to choose taxable sales. And the next thing is, which account would you like this to go back to? We're going to pick, in this particular case, materials income. Remember, it needs to go to an income account. It says that right there. Do not pick a different type on this particular drop-down. At the very bottom, because this is inventory, you want to keep this inventory asset account right here, because anytime you have inventory in the back room, it is an asset to your business. You are worth more because you have that inventory. You can set a minimum and a maximum reorder point. A minimum means when you get down to, let's just say 2, you want QuickBooks to pop up and tell you to order some more. A maximum means you don't want to get over a certain amount because you don't want to have too many in the back room. So you can set that as well, and it will pop up and let you know. How many do you currently have on hand? Let's say you have 3. It will go ahead and calculate that total value for you. Notice it is calculating 3 times your cost right over here. And of course, the next thing is your as of date. That's really all you need to set up when you're setting up an inventory part. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And let's see what it looks like in our list. Here's our screen door. Notice we have 3 of these on hand, and the price, $225, is what we charge for these. I want to point out something that I mentioned to you a little bit earlier. If you look over at the column that says account right here, remember I said to you that most of the time your items will point back to an income account. Not always, but most of the time. If I scroll to the top of this list and look, you'll notice going down this list, these all represent income accounts. It's not until I get way down here where they're talking about freight and delivery. In this case, it's one that's reimbursable. Then they have some other accounts. But like I said, most of the time you want these to point back to an income account. And that's one of the things that when I'm working sometimes with customers of my own, that they will say to me, that my inventory is not right, the numbers are not right, and most of the time when I look back, these accounts are just all over the board. So make sure that you have most of these set up to an income account. There's a few things on the bottom I just want to mention to you real quick. First of all, under this item, you'll see there's a drop-down list, and these are the same options that we could do when we right-clicked earlier. Notice there is a find option here, and I wanted to point out that this is where you can find this item in transactions in QuickBooks. But if you're just looking for an item in this list, you can look for it right up here. You can type in any part of the name that you might know. And if you don't know the name, you can look at maybe a preferred vendor, or if you have a part number and you don't know what it goes to, you can look it up that way. I want to also point out that you have several reports you can run that have to do with your items. And also where it says Excel here, you can actually import items you might already have in Excel, or if you want to paste from Excel. And basically what that would mean is if you already have an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, you can go ahead and pull in all those items, provided that your spreadsheet is set up with these headings as your column headings at the top. And that's really all you need to know. I'm going to go ahead and close that. That's going to go ahead and wrap up section 1 where we've been talking about working with items. Let's move on now to section 2 and I'll show you how to create purchase orders. You have the ability to create purchase orders in QuickBooks. Basically, a purchase order is a record of an order you've placed. Usually it's for a product that you've ordered. Think about the screen doors that we set up back in section 1. If I wanted to order some more of these, I could give them my purchase order number, and then they would actually fill that order and then ship it to me. Purchase orders are just a way of tracking your different orders, and they're really handy if you order a lot of items. That way you can kind of keep track of what's come in and what hasn't. Let me go ahead and show you how to go ahead and create a purchase order. Before we create our purchase order, I'm going to flip over to the item list and see how many screen doors we currently have. It looks like we have 3, and we're going to order 4 more, so we'll see that number change. Back on the home screen, there's an icon here for purchase orders. Before I click on that, let me just mention something that I talked to you about way back when we created our estimates. Anything on this line right here is considered non-posting. I can place a purchase order all day long for 4 more of these screen doors, but they may never come in. That's why this is considered non-posting. Once they do come in, that's when you start seeing those numbers show up in your reports. You'd have to run specific purchase order reports to see what's open, if you've got purchase orders are closed, meaning you've received all the items from them. Maybe some of these have a door or 2 left. You can run reports to see that. I'm going to click on purchase orders. The first thing it asks me is, who is my vendor? I'm going to pick Perry Windows and Doors. I'll choose the class Remodel. And if I want Perry to ship these and drop them off at my customer site, I can choose that customer and job. If not, I'll just leave that blank. This is the template we're currently using for this purchase order. We will see in a later module we can customize this one or we can add a new one. I'm going to click down where it says item here and drop down the list and choose screen door. You'll see it pre-populated the description and the rate because that's what we set up when we set up this item. If I wanted to add something to this description or type over it, I can do so all day long. How many are we wanting to order? That's the quantity. We're going to say 4. And let's say that we're buying 4 because they're on sale. Let's say that they're going to be $125. If I'm buying these for a specific customer or job, I can choose it from the list here. This is a little different from up here where it says drop ship because this is where I want Perry to ship the items. This is just saying, am I buying these for a particular customer or job? You'll notice that it calculated 4 times my rate to give me the 500 for the amount. And that's all I want to do. Let's look at a couple of the options around the top here. Notice we're under the main tab, and let's see if there's anything that's different. I think you're familiar with most of these by now. We've got your find option if you want to search through your purchase orders. Here's your new option. Remember, this would save this one and create a new one. I could go ahead and just save this now. This can also be saved as a PDF in case I want to maybe go into Outlook and attach it as a file. Here's where I delete it. I can also create a copy or memorize this. Over here is where I'm going to print this. Let's preview it and see what it looks like right now. You'll notice it's very simple. It has my company name and address on the left. It says it's a purchase order. And you can see it's got the vendor name. It's going to be shipped to my company address. And then you'll see down at the bottom I have the item, the description, the quantity, the rate, and the amount. Let's go ahead and close that at the top. Under the Formatting tab, this is where we're going to be able to customize some of the purchase order templates, run our spell check, we can insert a line, delete a line, and copy a line. This has more options here for customizing the template as well. The last tab says Reports, and I want you to make particular note of the open purchase orders right here. Open purchase orders are purchase orders you've created, but you haven't received everything on those purchase orders. You'll want to run that frequently and make sure you've gotten all that you ordered. You can see these by job, you can look at them by item, and you can also see an item list and any purchases you made by vendor. Over here is the date of the particular purchase order. I'm going to date this for the 19th. And remember I told you that anything that's numbered in QuickBooks starts with number 1 and will number sequentially. If you needed to change that number, you can change it to anything you like. That's pretty much all there is to creating a purchase order. I'm going to go ahead and save and close this one at the bottom. And let's look back at the item list for a second, because I want to show you that there are still 3, because all we've done is placed an order. We have not actually received them yet. That's what we're going to do over in section 3. I'm going to show you how to receive those items, and when we do, this quantity will increase by 4. Once we've placed a purchase order for some items, then the next step is those items will actually be shipped to us by the vendor, and we'll need to go through QuickBooks and receive them. That's how those items will get into our inventory. Let me show you how to go through the Receive Items window and actually receive the items so that you can see your inventory actually go up. Before we actually receive our items, I wanted you to notice that if we're looking in our inventory list, we will see that we have 3 of the screen doors. We've ordered 4 more and they've just come in, so we're going to receive them into our inventory. Back on the home screen, we're following the flow chart. The next thing after purchase orders is receive inventory. You'll notice there's a down arrow because this can actually happen one of 2 ways. The vendor can actually ship the items and include the bill in the packaging with the items. But more than likely, it's going to go the bottom way, where the vendor will ship the items and you'll get a packing slip along with your items, and later a bill will come to you in the mail or email or however they send it. We're going to choose the bottom option. This is what's called an item receipt, and the first thing I want to know is who is our vendor. This is Perry Windows and Doors. It will pop up and say open purchase orders exist for this vendor and ask if we want to receive against one of these. An open purchase order means that there are still items we haven't received. We're going to say yes. You'll want to choose whichever purchase order you want to receive the items against. In this case, it was the one dated 12/19, and we're going to click OK. And now you'll see that it has actually pre-populated this items tab with those 4 screen doors. If your vendor had shipped 3 and one was on back order, all you would do is change this quantity to 3. That would leave 1 still open on that purchase order, and when it came in, you would receive it the same way. I'm going back up here to the date. Let's say we received the items on the 24th. If there was a reference number that you wanted to put in here, you could. And the total is $500. There is no tax or shipping or anything on this because this is not the bill. This is just a receipt showing we received the items that we actually told it we wanted. Up at the top here, there's not too many things that are new. I did want to mention that if you picked the wrong purchase order before you came into the item receipt here, you could go back to select purchase order and change it to the correct one. You also have the ability here if you want to enter some time. Remember that job costing involves time that you or your employee spend working on a project or a job for a customer. Part of that time might be receiving these items. It might take a little bit of time to open the box and check them out and actually put them in your inventory in the back room. The clear splits option would just basically delete everything here, and then we can have it recalculate if we needed to. Under the Reports tab, you have a few reports you'll want to make sure you're aware of. Here's your item listing, your open purchase order detail, vendor balance detail, and your unpaid bills detail. You might want to look at those. You've also got your purchases by vendor detail here as well. That's really all there is to actually receiving your items. I'm going to save and close at the bottom, and let's go check out our inventory now. We should have 7. Under the item list, and we do. We have 7 screen doors now. And that's one of the ways that your items get into inventory. Let me go ahead and go back to the home screen now. And I want to talk to you a little bit about creating bills for those items over in section 4. Once you've received your items, in this case the screen doors that we ordered, we're going to get a bill at some point that we'll have to pay. I want to go ahead and show you how to enter that bill and how to actually tell QuickBooks that you're creating a bill based on that item receipt that you entered. Let's flip over to QuickBooks and I'll show you how to create a bill for items. If we're following the flow chart, the next thing on the flow chart says enter bills against inventory. Let me just mention that if you went straight to this enter bills here, which would be okay, as soon as you put in that the vendor's name is Perry Windows and Doors, it would pop up and say, would you like to receive against one of your item receipts? So either way would work, but let's follow the flow chart. The first thing it asks me for this item receipt is who is my vendor, and it's Perry Windows and Doors. I'm going to select the item receipt I'd like to pull in and click OK. And now you'll see that I have a bill and it pre-populated with all that information from that item receipt. Because this is a bill, we're going to have to change the date. We'll say we received this on January the 15th. We're going to plug in the reference number. Remember, on the vendor side, it is an invoice. On your side, it is a bill. And we're going to say it's $525 because they actually charged us for freight and delivery as well. Always check your due date. Make sure that that is accurate. You want your reports to be accurate when you run reports to see how much you owe. Here's where you have your terms. If those are not correct, you can change that. You can also plug in a discount date if you have terms that are one of these two and they give you a small discount. There's a place for a memo. And you'll see that it pre-populated everything on this items tab. There's really nothing you have to change there, other than if these go to a particular customer and job, you could pick it from this list. On the expenses tab, this is where I'm going to choose the freight and delivery of $25. And again, if it's for a particular customer and job, I'll want to choose that from the drop-down list. And I also want to be careful that I'm always using my class list so that my reports are accurate when I pull them up. Let's see if there's anything new up on your tabs here at the top. We're on the main tab, and most of this you're already familiar with. I will mention this. If you need to select a different purchase order, maybe you pulled in the wrong one, you can go here and you can actually look at any of those POs. Also, remember that some of the time spent on processing this bill is part of your job costing, so if you wanted to add that, you could. You could also clear your splits down here. Your split is where you have 500 on one tab and 25 on another. And notice the last tab says you can pay the bill. We're not at a point where we're ready to pay the bill yet, but I could if I was on this screen. There are some reports that you'll want to make sure you look at. You can run a transaction history if you want to follow this bill all the way back. You can also look at some of these others over here. There's an item listing, an open purchase order detail, vendor balance detail, unpaid bills detail, and purchases by vendor detail. We're going to be looking at a lot of these reports in a later module, but these are the ones related to this particular bill. All I'm going to do is go ahead and save and close, and this bill is now in my accounts payable. And by the way, because this one was linked to an item receipt, which was linked to a purchase order, it will always bring you this, give you this message saying that it's linked to other transactions. Are you sure you want to change it? Yes. And that's all you have to do to enter your bills against your inventory. Let's go ahead now and move over into section 5, and I will talk to you about paying for those items. Now that we've ordered 4 more of the screen doors, we are going to have to go ahead and pay for them. We did get the bill, and now it's time to pay for these. It's very easy. Let me go ahead and flip over to QuickBooks, and I'll show you how to pay for those items. You're actually going to pay this bill the same way that you paid any other bills you had entered in QuickBooks. You're just going to follow the flowchart to the very end where it says Pay Bills. In this case, we're trying to pay Perry Windows and Doors, and you'll see there's quite a few bills here, but I'll go ahead and check off the one that we created for $525. If I wanted to go to that bill and look at it, I could do that down here at the bottom. Remember that you can't double click here. I'm going to change the date of my payment. I'm going to say it's January the 20th. I'm going to pay with a check, and I'll assign a check number here. All I have to do now is hit Pay Selected Bills. I'm going to actually put in the word debit since I used the debit card to pay for this, and click OK. And now that I've paid that, it's going to ask me if I have some more bills I'd like to pay, or am I done? And I'm just going to say I'm done. And now that whole process has been completed. You have gone from a purchase order, you've received your items, which went into inventory, we received a bill and we entered that, and then we paid the bill. Now that process is totally complete. Let's go ahead and look at one more thing in this module over in section 6. I want to show you how